Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Before we start, just as always, a quick sound check. I hope everybody can hear us well. Maybe some of you can let us know in the chat whether the sound is okay. Excellent, great. Well, we have 4 positives, 5 positives, so I think this is positively validated, Matthijs.
I guess so.
Welcome again to this webinar. It's the second in a series of 4, which we're doing in this year, which addresses several key innovation topics. Last time in January, we covered innovation strategy, which is obviously a prerequisite for portfolio management. And today we will address innovation portfolio management. By the way, the following webinars will cover innovation of organization or the organization of innovation, including skills and competencies. And the 4th one will be on innovation culture. At the end of the webinar, you can sign up for them.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe Rob, if you can share the presentation, then we can have everybody sort of follow along. So also good morning from my side. As I said, we're talking about innovation portfolio management today. And in our previous webinars, which we did last year, we focused on basically the innovation challenges that every organization faces when going through the innovation phases. And the first one, obviously, is the ideation challenge, which revolves around so how to spot, select, and create your innovation opportunities. The second one revolves around validation. So how do you assess, the true potential of your innovation ideas, and also how do you avoid sort of unjustified investments in hobby horses or projects that just don't take off. And then the third one, we talked about the scale-up challenge, which in our opinion is one of the most difficult phases in innovation. And that covers how to turn on the right growth engines for your innovation. And actually, we'll use that structure in this webinar as well, when we talk about innovation portfolio management, because it's just a helpful way of looking at innovation. We've described those innovation challenges in our playbook. You've seen in our trailer video that you can download the playbook from our website. But I think, Rob, you can make it available for download as well. So that just to give you a bit of an introduction of what we will be talking about today. These webinars, in this webinar series, we focus on best-in-class innovators, or what it takes for organizations to be best-in-class. And so what distinguishes best-in-class innovators? One, they have a well-defined innovation strategy and roadmap. Actually, this is one of the topics that we discussed in our webinar of last month. Then the next one is they manage their innovation portfolio professionally. So we'll be covering that topic today at length. The third one, which will be the topic for a discussion in our next webinar in March, is about how to embed innovation in your organization, or the organization of innovation, if you will. And then lastly, best-in-class innovators continuously develop their innovation competence, culture, and leadership. So that's what we actually perceive, best-in-class innovators to be.
Well, and just to introduce ourselves, I think some of you have been following us last year and even this year in our webinars. But for those of you who are new to these webinar series, my name is Mark Dauma. I'm partner and one of the co-founders at RevelX. Next to me is Matthijs Rosman. We will be your host for this webinar, as always, and Matthijs already mentioned him, Rob Nouwens, our chief commercial guy. He's behind the controls. He's going to make sure everything runs smoothly, as always. Rob will also pick up questions in the chat. And just briefly about RevelX, we're a boutique consultancy. We help our clients to realize growth through innovation. We work for large corporates as well as smaller scale-ups, aiming to become a corporate through innovation. And we have quite an experience in a range of different industries. Looking at today's webinar, we're going to cover 4 main topics. First one is, how do you design an innovation portfolio? Second one, once you have that, how are you going to manage your innovation funnel? And the third topic will be about reporting. That will be, by the way, quite briefly, because it's kind of not the most exciting. It's kind of a dirty job and it has to be done. Yeah. And the last one, it's kind of a sort of a sneak preview into the next webinar, which is about making stage gate decisions. So that will be the main focus for today's webinar. If you have questions, please mention them in the chat. They can be very practical, like logging in, but if you have more questions on what we discuss, just let us know. We will probably pick them up, some of them going along in the webinar. Yeah. There's also room for a Q&A at the end, but we like to keep it interactive. So please let us know your questions.
Yep.
And well, we'll be hosting some polls as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll, as Mark said, we'll look at the chat screen in front of us just to see what you guys have to mention. And indeed, we'd like to keep these sessions interactive, and that means that every now and then we'll launch a poll. And the first one is just to really get you started. We would like to know from you guys how good you are or your organization is at innovation portfolio management. And so we have 4 options. We see that it's already been answered. So the first one is we don't have innovation portfolio management. We're at a beginner level. We have some success with portfolio management, or we completely master it. You know, if you completely master it, then we'll be really interested to hear your experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
With this topic.
Yeah. Well, but looking at the answers, Matthijs, nobody feels completely confident that they really mastered, but I think that's always good. You know, there is always more to learn. Around 30% as well, we don't have it, and another 40% we're at beginner level, which is, I think, and we'll talk about that briefly later on, is also in line with the results from our innovation benchmark, where we see that this is one of the key development areas for many companies, which I think why this webinar, well, may be helpful. Hopefully, is helpful.
Yeah, and we've also seen that in the amount of people signing up to this webinar.
Exactly.
So, so again, proof that this is a very topical issue. So let's dive into innovation portfolio management, and obviously a definition is at place here. So what do we understand innovation portfolio management to be? You can see on this slide what we talk about the art, if you will, of successfully managing a roadmap of innovation projects, which will help you deliver your innovation strategy. So it really is a next step from our last webinar when we talked about innovation strategy. Obviously, there are some things you have to do within innovation portfolio management, and on the sort of the most basic level, it's about project status and progress reporting, which is in any portfolio management process obviously the case. The other one is about stage gate decision making. You have to move a project from one stage to the next,
or stop it.
Or stop it, exactly. But we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the third one is revolves around resource allocation to innovation projects, which makes sure that your projects have enough budget, the right people, and the right sort of boundary conditions in place. So that's what we perceive innovation portfolio management to be as a starting point.
Yeah. Well, and then the question, obviously, why is it important? And as said, and also mentioned in previous webinars, I think it was in 2018 that we introduced the Innovation Readiness Benchmark, which is an online self-assessment built around 7 innovation best practice areas. One of them is innovation strategy. The other one, obviously, is innovation portfolio management. We have, I think, 350 companies already in our database who have used this tool to assess their innovation power. And well, in general, that gives them a great insight in where to focus on first when developing their innovation capabilities. Well, and to be honest, it gives us a good insight in what the relation is between best practice areas and innovation performance.
Yeah, and everyone within this webinar can take the innovation readiness.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's available on our website. I think it's in the Growth Warehouse, and then looking for the Innovation Readiness Benchmark. And I would definitely recommend that you will get a 2-page report, very simple, very, I think, insightful. So please have a look at that. Well, then, looking at some of the outcomes regarding portfolio management, and as said before, it's actually the least well-developed best practice area of all 7 across the database. So this is where, on average, the participants in our benchmark rate the lowest. And if you then look at some of the underlying best practices, we see that only 33%, so only a third of the companies in a benchmark, says, well, actually, we closely monitor the performance of innovation projects on well-defined metrics. And then we have a group who does it sort of okay, but there is a large group that doesn't do it. So 33%, it's not a lot.
And the addition of well-defined metrics is in place here, so that's an important thing.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about metrics later on. Another third of the companies says, well, we don't have solid financial business cases for. Sorry, I've just stated the wrong way around. Only 35% of the company says we have solid financial business cases for our innovation projects. And only 39% of the companies quickly stops with projects that show no viability. And I think that's also the tagline of this webinar. It's portfolio management is saying no to 1,000 things. Well, and that's in practice harder than it seems. Then you could say, well, why bother? And as an innovation consultant, of course, you're going to tell me that's important. But when we take a close look at the data, and we've differentiated between what we call the low performance on innovation, and that's based on their rating on 5 criteria. And we see that of the low performance, only 3% is good at innovation portfolio management. If we then look at the sort of the middle group, the average performance, it goes up to 16%. And if we then go up to the higher performers, we see that 51% of them is good at innovation portfolio management, which, by the way, again emphasizes that this is not a well-developed area, but it also proves that being good at portfolio management has a direct relation with a good innovation performance. Yeah. And I think that very much also relates to making sure that projects that are not viable are stopped at the early stage or pivoted when needed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a real benefit to sort of doing portfolio management well within your organization, and we just listed some reasons why you should pay attention to this. And the first one really is to align your strategy and your innovation pipeline. We often see in so many cases that the strategy and innovation pipeline are completely disconnected, and that causes a lot of frustration within the organization. The second one is also to balance your innovation portfolio or your innovation projects within your portfolio over the sort of the 3 horizons of innovation, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on this as well. And the third benefit of having portfolio management done well is that you can then focus your scarce resources to maximize value creation. So every organization has the problem of resource scarcity, especially in I think the past 2 years. It's been sort of scrambling to get resources in place for innovation.
Yeah, and then what quite often happens is what we call sort of the peanut butter syndrome. If you just have a sandwich and you have not a lot of peanut butter and you spread it very thin, then in the end you end up with a lot of projects, which kind of looks good because we have a lot of projects going on, but actually in reality people don't have the time to actually work on it. So we always say you can rather focus your resource on a limited number of projects and then do them well and do them quickly, instead of thinking you're doing well and then in the end nothing really happens within those projects because people only have like an hour and a half a week to work on it. So that's really a key thing in portfolio management. To balance the workload versus the amount of resources that you have available. Yeah,
exactly. Then the fourth one, as you just said about people having just limited time to work on innovation, is if you do your portfolio management well and have your stage gating process in place, it provides a lot of clarity for people. What is expected from us as an innovation team, because that's in many cases is a problem. How do I know if I can advance my project from one stage to the next or get funding for it? Then the fifth one is obviously an important one. If you're looking to sort of gain a strategic or a competitive advantage from innovation, is that it shortens the time to market, also by setting clear targets for your stage gates, and lastly, it just reduces the number of hobby horses or even dead horses within a portfolio. And actually, we see this a lot, that portfolios are sort of cluttered with projects which either don't move forward or even drop out because no decisions are being made. So those are just the benefits of doing project management well. So so if we then move into how to design your innovation portfolio, we'll have a bit of a deep dive into that just now. So your portfolio of innovation projects basically has two main dimensions, and the first dimension is sort of defined by the project size and the impact of the business of of the projects that you're doing. And the other one, and we just alluded to it a little bit earlier, is you have to make sure that you have a balance over the three horizons of innovation. And we discussed them in previous webinars, but just to quickly go through them. So obviously the first horizon is, let's say, 1 to 3 years ahead, depending on your organization and the industry, obviously. And those are the projects that focus on maintaining and strengthening the core of your organization. The second horizon, again, depending on your organization and industry, 2 to 5 years ahead are sort of about exploring and discovering sort of new expansions of your business. And the third one, which is more of a long-term innovation endeavor, talks about creating entirely new possibilities and competences for your organization. And it's really important to get sort of a logical balance of across these three horizons. Focus too much on sort of the short-term projects, you can easily be perceived as having sort of no long-term vision as an organization. Focus too much in Horizon 3, and your organization will not see enough sort of tangible benefits from your innovation activities. So that doesn't work as well either. So that's all about sort of the balance within your innovation portfolio. And then the portfolio should always be sort of focused around your innovation themes. And in our previous webinar, when we talked about innovation strategy, we introduced our innovation strategy canvas, which you can also download from our website. So it talks about how it's important to have clear themes within your organization to sort of build your future readiness of your organization. And so the makeup of your portfolio should be covering all of those horizons of innovations, obviously, but also covering your innovation themes effectively. And it should also you should also have projects within each of the stages of the innovation process, right? Because you don't want a too lopsided innovation portfolio.
Yeah, and I think those themes will also help you to kind of focus your ideation process. We're now working for a large let's say Dutch equipment company.
Yeah.
I think everybody knows them, but I can't mention the name at this point. And there we, at the end came up to 4 themes. And what we see is that some themes are quite well populated in terms of innovation projects, but others are, well, actually quite thin. So then we know we have a gap to close over there.
Yeah. I see Marcel just asked the question about what's the metric for portfolio management. We'll get to that a little bit later on in our presentation. And by the way, there's not just one metric. There are quite a few.
Yeah, right. So I think once you have sort of when you have looked at your current innovation initiatives, a key question to answer is, do they make the cut? That's kind of a term from the Marines in the US. But it's very important at a really early stage to look at, well, okay, does this qualify as an innovation initiative? We've seen examples where, for example, Microsoft 365 implementation was actually on the list of the innovation project. Well, that may be very innovative for some companies, but in general, I would argue it would not qualify as an innovation initiative. It should link to a theme, and if it does not, then you should really ask yourself, if you have a well-defined innovation strategy where you've thought about those themes, if it doesn't fit with the theme, well, then either you've sort of misdefined your themes, or you should maybe not pursue that innovation project. And we should have at least some feel for the viability of it. And sometimes you're working on projects that are so far-fetched that you kind of know we're never going to, pull this one off. And so making the cut at an early stage when looking at your current innovation projects, that's quite important.
And maybe before we move on, I know we talked about it in our last webinar as well, but the first one, qualifying as an innovation initiative, just defining within your organization what innovation means to you is sort of a key prerequisite for this stage. So if you don't have sort of a set definition for innovation, get working on that.
Yeah,
today.
and also be clear on what are really innovation initiatives that are, and we would always argue they need to be customer oriented, so they need to make the difference in the marketplace versus what we call the innovation enablers.
Yeah.
Quite often you see if companies start working on digitalization, there's a lot of enabling stuff that you need to get in place in terms of cloud platforms, IT platforms, which is a prerequisite for being able to do those innovations. But in the end, those are not the innovation projects. It's basically stuff that you need to get in place to be able to do those innovations. So be very clear on what are the actual innovations and what are more the enablers, which is, by the way, another section in our innovation strategy canvas, if you've been participating in the last webinar. So then you have kind of the overall list, and then the question is, of course, how does my overall portfolio look like? So once you've defined that, and you won't start with a blank sheet of paper, you have existing projects, you have new projects, and they all must be evaluated and assessed together. And we always do that on kind of 3 levels. First is the strategy alignment. How does it fit with your own innovation strategy? I already covered that, but which horizons are covered? Do you have a good distribution across the innovation funnel? If you only have projects that are very early in the stage, well, you need to get them moving across the stages. We'll discuss the stages, by the way, later on. Do they create enough value? I think in the end, you need to look at your portfolio also in terms of value creation, and does it really deliver profitable new business? And then the execution, again, as Matthijs already said, can we actually execute this portfolio? And we've been working for one of the, let's say, Dutch logistical providers, it's the largest one, and they had a portfolio of 250 projects, which I think required 3 times more than they actually had available in terms of resources. So that's kind of a challenge, of course. Now we have a list of questions which is much more detailed, available for assessing your portfolio. Rob will make that available.
And this is actually a very important. If you're an innovator at heart, and so this is an important step to work on with your management team, also to have a really close look at scrutinizing your existing portfolio and just to see whether.
And this quite often leads to tough choices.
It does, yeah. So it's going to be painful, going through the list.
I think the most sort of well, there was at least the project with the most interesting name I've ever executed was Project Kill. For one of our clients who had so many projects that we in the end said, well, we just need to get rid of a number of projects no matter what, because that was the peanut butter syndrome we were suffering from.
Absolutely.
So we started a project which had a very clear objective. It's to kill innovation projects, to basically free up resource and execute the other ones more successfully. And I said, you need to keep doing this. This is not like a one-time effort. You may have to put a bit more effort in it for the first time, but this is something you need to continuously be doing. We'll talk about that later also in our next webinar in terms of how you organize innovation. Typically a growth board or innovation board has a key role in that, but it's a continuous process. When building a portfolio, always be aware of some of the typical pitfalls. The wrong projects, as said, Office 365 implementation, is that an innovation project? Not quite sure. Enablers, do they qualify as innovation project? Not quite sure. Too many projects, lopsided. I think we've gone over them already. And then the other one, Rob, I can't see the screen. Maybe. So a bit of a technical challenge over here, doesn't really matter. And then the other one, of course, is avoid the hobby horses and dead horses altogether. I think we will make the resource available later on. Rob, isn't that? So there was a download, we couldn't find it. It will come available to you all later on. But these are kind of typical pitfalls. Then the question is, of course, which pitfall do you encounter the most? So let's have a poll again. Rob will make that available. I think it's popping up now in your poll screen. And then, which pitfall do you encounter most often? Is it wrong projects, too many projects, lopsided, or do you still have a lot of hobby and even dead horses lying around?
Yeah, I think this one was to be expected.
It's too many projects. Yeah. That's the clear, let's not say winner, but it's the obvious one. So 60% of you says, well, we have too many innovation projects going around, which is on the one hand good news, because you're working on innovation, you find a lot of projects. So I think that shows good intention. But as said, there is a risk that in the end you end up with them progressing too slowly. Yeah, and then obviously the downside of it is, have you been critical enough about what projects you admit to your innovation portfolio? Are they actual innovation projects, or are they just improvement projects, which actually don't make the cut, as Mark just explained. So we just then move on to sort of the next section in this webinar, which talks about stage gate design and criteria. And I already saw some of the questions within the chat, which revolved around our sort of a funnel approach. So when we talk about stage gate design and criteria, it really revolves around, so what kind of criteria do you use to see if your projects move from one to the next? And if you've been browsing sort of the web on this topic, you will have found probably many innovation funnel models. And basically, this on the screen, this is the one that we're using. This is the one that actually we build up over the years in our years of experience and I think Matthijs, as you said, there are a lot of models out there. I think all of them are sort of built around a similar kind of idea. It's not to say that it's not about good or bad, but in the end we found that this model works best for us based on the experience we have. Exactly. And it's kind of the sort of the best of all worlds. Best of a lot of worlds. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what you see here, we again, as I said in the introduction, we take back the idea that organizations go through those three challenges of ideation, validation, and scale up, but then we defined sort of six stages with stage gates that innovation projects go through. So exploration, discovery, external validation, internal validation, launch, and accelerate. So this is what we perceive sort of the full innovation funnel to look like. Maybe one word about, or a few words about innovation stages versus stage gates, because we feel that that's often sort of a misleading thing. So the stages really refer to the process steps that innovations go through. It's basically where you build the deliverables that you need to make sort of an honest assessment about your innovation projects and whether they can move from one stage to the next. And the other stage gates are sort of the decision moments for your projects, right? So that's where you really take a close look at is this innovation project worthy of moving on to the next level or the next stage. And with a stage gate decision, you actually unlock, if you will, some of the prerogatives for your innovation project. For example, getting more resources or more budget, or maybe access to external stakeholders. To get back to Marcel's earlier question, you will see metrics for each of those stage gates. So there are metrics by which you can sort of evaluate whether the outcome is good enough to progress to the next one. And later on, Matthijs will also go into a number of sort of overall portfolio metrics. So exactly. So you have to. Those are the basic metrics. Are my projects sort of running on time? Are they in line with sort of the planned go-to-market? Are the right resources and all the sorts of things we'll look at. So let's dive in, or do a bit of a deep dive into those 6 innovation stages. And the first one starts with exploration. And exploration is sort of related to your innovation themes, right? So you do a deep dive or explore your innovation themes in more detail. You want to come up with a long list of innovation ideas which are sort of in line with your innovation theme. And what we like to see is that innovation teams come up with a pitch or rationale for pursuing a certain idea, right? So
Mark already sort of talked about the growth board, which we'll discuss in more detail in our next webinar when we talk about the innovation, organization of innovation. But it's really important just to get your management on board with your innovation ideas. And then if you look at some of those criteria, so what do you look for to advance a project from this stage to the next one is, well, obviously, is it supporting the theme? Do we have any idea whether customers will like it or it will fit with our customer base? Does it fit with us? Do we have a chance of pulling it off? Do we have the right resources? And ultimately, I think we're looking for sort of building the confidence about sort of substantiating a theme over the long term. So it's whether we have a durable or sustainable theme, which helps us deliver on our strategy. So that's the first phase. But then moving on to the second phase, which obviously is the discovery phase, and we'll look at each of the projects that have been produced within which have actually gone through the exploration phase. And as innovation innately is customer focused, at least from our perspective. You start to elaborate on innovation ideas in the context of the customer or consumer, depending on what business you are in. And you're in this phase, you're trying to discover what are the problems worth solving, or are there problems worth solving? And if there are none, obviously that's one of the key dropout reasons for a project if we can find them. So what should innovation teams deliver within this stage? Obviously, the first one is who's our customer, and we'd still like to use the persona approach. So what kind of personas are we going to target? And then problem statements is the second one. So obviously, a persona or a customer segment should have a problem that we can worth solving. And what is it in simple terms? So what is that statement? And we have to get a feel for the size of the opportunity. So what is it a viable business for us to pursue? And you can do that through opportunity assessment approach. We have one in the innovation playbook, which you can follow. And in this stage, it's really about ballpark figures, right? So is this maybe, 100K, a million, a billion type of assessment that we're pursuing? And from a criteria perspective, so how do you assess whether a project can move on to the next stage gate, or the next stage is really look for sort of external orientation, right? So we want the themes are much more based on what we feel we have to what space we have to move in as an organization or as a company. And then external, and in this phase we're looking externally. So external orientation is a key one, and a simple one to look at is just to ask your innovation team. So how many customers have you consulted? Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then once you've sort of prioritized your ideas and think, well, these are the ones that we should focus on. And by the way, one of the questions, again, from Marcel, I think it was an interesting question. He says, if you're working on Horizon 3 projects, does that really fit with the stage gate culture? Because then you're sort of moving from one stage to the next. And I think thought about that, Marcel, and I think in the end, when looking at Horizon 3 projects, you will typically find them to be more fundamental. They will probably require more research. It's more uncharted territory in the end. So I think you will find that the progressing along the stages will be slower, and you may even have to do some more fundamental research in the early stages, like the discovery, for example. Yeah. So I think typically those would be projects that spend a longer time in the discovery phase, where you even have to maybe invest serious money upfront to see if you can actually sort of come to a sort of a feasible solution where it's doable. You may need to reach out to partners, for example, because you can't do it by yourself. So I think the stage gate approach still applies also for the Horizon 3 projects, because in the end it's about becoming clearer in every stage on what it is that you're going to bring to the market, but it just will take longer. And I think you should also be expecting and willing to invest more money in the earlier stages than you have to do for the other ones.
Absolutely.
Also, with an eye to the time, moving to the next two stages then is the validation. And here we differentiate between the external validation, where we always prefer to start, By the way, Lily, one of our customers, Lily Young, working at PVG Holdings, she's the CEO over there. We're now in the midst of a validation phase for some innovation ideas over there. And that's really about going out to your customers to see if the ideas, and especially the most critical assumptions that you have underlying those ideas, actually hold true. And critical assumptions is kind of like, if they are not true, then it's kind of make or break for the project at the end. So what you need to deliver, of course, is those critical assumptions. You may want to develop a couple of MVPs or customer presentations, as Lily and I did together, which you can then bring to your customers. And that will obviously give you insights. So we'll probably be looking at a couple of pivots that you need to make, all in the external validation phase. And basically, this is about getting as much customer evidence as you can find. And it's really about, have we really tested the proposition in front of our customers? You can do so with a lot of your own internal people. At the end of the day, the customers, they will determine whether it will work or not. And what we're looking for is problem solution fit. How well do our innovation address the real issues from our potential customers? And of course, solution market fit. Can we find customers willing to pay for our innovation?
And you'll see in the slides that it's not a typo. We talk about MVS.
That's a good one.
And I know that the sort of the popular term is MVP, minimum viable product. We like to talk about minimum viable solutions, as we found that it's not always about a product. It can also be about a new business model or a service or something like that. So that's. It's not a typo. Minimum viable solutions that will go for.
Exactly, especially when you're looking more at sort of the digital development.
Exactly.
You see a lot of OEM companies who are extremely good at developing superior technological products that are connected, that offer a lot of data opportunities around which you then can build services. And those services, they're not products that you can put in a box. So we prefer to talk about minimum viable solutions. I think Herman, CEO at Holmato, also in this webinar, he will probably recognize this particular topic. Holmato, by the way, one of the leading international market leaders in rescue tooling, which is now also moving into services. Very interesting developments over there. Which then brings us to the next step, which is the internal validation. And the internal validation is really about, can we make a viable business model? So can we economically produce the proposition, and can we do so in a way that actually delivers positive results? So is it a profitable business model? And a key deliverable in this stage obviously is the business model canvas. I think most of you are familiar with that. And we find it very helpful still, as a model to use. It's kind of a tool for checking whether all the elements of your business model are in place. And this is also the stage where you start planning for market launch. Can we actually successfully launch a proposition? Do we have a clear market segment? How do we reach that market segment? And this is in
do we have access to it?
Exactly. And this is in the end about proving business model fit. So obviously we're looking for proof of profitability and market viability.
So I just saw Marco's question about capability fit, and this is really in internal validation. You look for that capability fit. So if you take the left side of the business model canvases, looking at sort of key activities and key resources to deploy, that really is part of that internal validation step. It's just to look, do we have the right resources within the organization to sort of pull it off, and can we sort of deploy the right activities? So and that gap analysis obviously is key. So Marco, thanks for your question there. And as Mark just said about the internal validation phase, you start thinking about launch, right? So in the launch stage, you start launching your innovation into the market, and you're looking for how your innovation is perceived in the market, and if you can create traction with some early adopters. And if you look at the deliverables in this phase, this is really a phase where you're looking for more sort of analytics and assessment of where your innovation is. So you see in this slide what we call cohort analysis. So the cohort analysis really is, so what's the behavior of your first set of customers, right? So when they interact with your product or service, and what does that tell you about how you then sort of change your launch strategy going forward? But also it's where you do a sort of an early assessment of acquisition costs. So you made a sort of an estimation of what this innovation is going to bring you in terms of profitability. But now you get a feel for what is it required to acquire customers for this innovation. And you move into scale-up planning. So you take all that learning into, so how can we scale up an innovation in the business? So again, what you're looking for is proof of traction. How does the market commit to your propositions by first of all ordering conversion rate, but also using a product, being an advocate to your proposition and so on. And so the ultimate test is no traction, and do we get a sort of a first feel for the volumes required for this to make this innovation successful in the market. And once we're past that phase of launching and we're sort of teased out all of those growing pains of an innovation, we start focusing on accelerating. And this is, I think this is an area of debate whether it is still in the innovation space or not. We think it is because the key here obviously is to get an innovation handed over from an innovation team to a business team. And it's really about turning on the growth engine. So how can I get sort of a full get an innovation fully accepted by the market and getting some serious numbers. So it's really about transitioning innovation out of the innovation domain to the business. What we're looking for in terms of deliverables. So what does the business scorecard look like? Do we have a solid handover plan? Is the standing organization or the core organization ready to take on your innovation endeavor, or maybe even an innovation play? And can they sort of take care of further growth? We always use the growth strategy canvas in this stage, another resource that you can download from our website, but that really talks about how can you assess those growth engines and how do you turn them on. And we're looking for, in this stage, revenue parameters. Obviously, what's the average rate of return, what's the monthly rate of return, depending on what you're launching into the market, what's the return on the investments like marketing, and how does customer lifetime value sort of evolve over time. So again, we're looking for proof of successful scaling, and this is one where let's say premature scaling is one of the key issues that's sort of is a bottleneck for a lot of organizations. I think we have the our funnel model as a download as well. You can either download it now, or we'll send it to you after we've done this, ready with the session. Yeah,
which, by the way, we've did a bit of a condensed version. There's a lot more detail behind that. So on this download, on the framework, if you want to know more, we're happy to share, as we always do in these webinars. So please reach out to us if you want to have more detail behind it. Yeah. But that kind of requires a voiceover as well.
It does. Yes, exactly. It does. And obviously, so we talked about innovation projects moving through the innovation funnel, and you also have to keep in mind some overall performance metrics for your entire portfolio. And there's basically two that we're looking at. One is the effectiveness of the innovation process itself, and the other one is performance of innovation projects. And if you look at effectiveness of the innovation process, it's obviously time to market is a key thing to look at. But also stage gate passing rates. And we're not looking for 100%, right? Because if we advance everything through the stage gates, then either we have too few innovation projects going through, but at least has to be a considerable number. Value development obviously is one. Our investments in line with what innovations can bring us. What does organizational involvement look like? Do we have the right people involved? Also, do we have the right seniority in the organization involved in the innovation process? And ultimately, the innovation process is about sort of learning philosophy, right? So how much can we learn, and how quickly can we learn, and how can we accelerate our learning going through the the process.
And these are typically metrics that you have to sort of look at on the combined set of projects in your portfolio. Mia, one of our customers, they have, I think, more than 400 R&D projects, ranging from rather more incremental innovations to really quite fundamental ones, moving into the hydrogen heating solutions, for example. And I'll show something later on where they are basically capable with the tool they have to assess these criteria, the average time to market, but also the value creation, the net present value of their combined portfolio, dissected in different decisions and so on. So they're really good at monitoring this on a portfolio level. And I think that's the trick. Also referring back to Marcel's earlier question, you can look at individual projects, which are the 6 stages, but then on top of that, you need to make sure that your overall portfolio is running in the right direction.
Exactly. Yeah, I see some questions about where you're actually developing your product or service, and that's really obviously it starts roughly in the ideation phases where you start to build an idea of what kind of solutions do I want to bring to the market. But it gets more and more tangible in, let's say, in the 3rd phase when you start building your minimum viable services or solutions, where you actually test those a proof of concepts with your customers. So let's move on to the next poll, and we want to sort of bring it back to you guys. So if you look at your organization, so what for your organization, what stage is most challenging for your organization? Is that exploration? Is it discovery? Is it external validation, internal validation, or launch? And we left out accelerate for just for simplicity purposes.
Yeah, and because the tool can't handle more than 6 options.
That's a very practical issue.
That's a very practical one.
Yeah.
Anyway, but this is interesting. I think this is quite interesting. What we see, and I hope everybody can see that sort of progressing along, is that the issue is not so much the exploration and the discovery. So I think there's a lot of good ideas going around, but especially the external validation is a key topic for around 50% of the participants. By the way, just a short commercial break. We have our webinars on demand available, so you can watch them on demand on our website. There is a particular one on validation.
Yeah.
So the people who said, well, external validation is a challenging one, either reach out to us or have a quick look maybe at that webinar in particular.
Just maybe one thing before we move on is I see some questions in the chat revolving on where and how to develop a product. So here we're really talking about how do we assess innovation ideas, right? So it's about the portfolio of ideas that go through your organization. If you go back to our webinars, in which we talked about the 3 innovation challenges, being them ideation, validation, and scaling, we talked a lot about how to come up with your minimum viable products and services, and ultimately your services. So those are 2 separate topics. So this is really about how to assess the portfolio. The other webinars are really about the how-to of the innovation process.
Yeah, that's a good point to mention. Well, as said, we're not going to spend hours, which is also not possible because we only have like 10 minutes left on reporting on your portfolio. I think it's good to know there are a lot of tools out there, and tooling in the end is always a means to an end. But especially when you're working in larger organizations with many projects, running at the same time. Like the example I gave from Mia, they by the way work with Planisware, another tool not even on this list. Forrester has done a ranking with examples like Planbox, Q Markets. I think at the end of the day, it's basically asking yourself, do I need a tool? How sophisticated does it need to be? And in some cases, Excel workbooks can also do the job. But especially when you have a lot of people working on innovation projects, it might be helpful to have kind of a cloud-based tool where at least that the status is always correct, instead of sending around lots of Excel sheets and PowerPoints, which we also see happening quite a lot.
And don't forget Microsoft Teams, because it's today we're implementing a portfolio management process in Microsoft Teams with one of our clients, because it's just, we've had 2 years of getting used to it. So I think now we're at a stage where we can actually use it.
And I think most of those tools, they will give you some sort of reporting capability. To be honest, I always found them a bit sort of restrained or constrained. It's kind of, you have to do with what they give to you. I find it sometimes easier to basically use the data from those tools and think about a very simple kind of reporting overview. This is kind of an example. You could say it's an anonymous example of something we've implemented at one of our clients, and it's basically looking at basic project information, stage planning. When do I move to the next stage? Which stage am I in? What's the general project performance? Ranking on the criteria Matthijs just discussed. What's the strategic value? More in the qualitative terms, but also in terms of net present value, for example, or turnover potential. So that's kind of your key business case data. And I find it always very helpful if you can come up with like a one-page summary of all your projects, where you can just have a quick look at how am I progressing. And then on top of that, also think about the overall metrics for your portfolio. If you look at this example, you can have, for example, 4 themes. How many projects do I have running in those themes? Where are they in the stage gates? Do I have enough projects in the earlier stages, but also in, close to the launch state? Which horizons am I covering within that theme? How is the project status on an overall level? Are most projects running okay, or do we have issues? And what's kind of the net present value? So these are kind of examples, and I would always, advocate that you tailor them to your own situation. But it's really helpful to have both, to have individual project overviews, but also kind of the combined portfolio reporting metrics.
Yep. So, and then I think the last part of this webinar, we shortly talk about stage gate decisions. We'll talk about that a lot more in our next webinar.
So we'll keep it short now.
So we'll keep it short, but
there's more to come.
There's a lot more to come. So just this is sort of a cliffhanger, I guess we're introducing here.
I think that was it.
Now we'll talk about the governance of the innovation funnel a lot more in the next webinar, when we talk about growth boards as being sort of a driving force for your portfolio management process. But the key when making decisions obviously is data-driven decision making. Nowadays, and also when we talked about in our last webinars about how do you innovate through each of those innovation stages. We live in a time when there's so much data available just by testing out new things and doing quick experiments. So that really is something that you have to ingrain very deeply within your organization, sort of adopting a data-driven mindset and really use that evidence from the experiments that you're running to make decisions. And it's also worthy to talk about minding your biases, and I guess we'll dive into that a little bit more also in our next webinar. Obviously there you have your own biases because you whether you're an innovator or a manager or a senior manager having to assess innovations, you have your own way of looking at things, and that's in many occasions is very subjective. Actually, also in our playbook, again, we describe many of those biases that teams go through.
Yeah, which brings us at the end of this webinar. As said, we have a lot of resources that we always like to share. Yep. It's kind of corny if you say sharing is caring, but actually we do care about sharing.
It is.
I think you can download them at our website. The links are there. We will, by the way, also make available the handout of this webinar of the sheets. You can always reach out to us and have like a 30-minute conversation if you like. So that's always an option that you have. Rob will now, I think, make the download available. If you can go back to the chat again, Rob, there was one question from Tico who said, and maybe we can take that as sort of the last question, also considering time. What would you say is the difference between an innovation portfolio and this idea to accelerate funnel? And I think, well, just in response to that, Tikor, I think the idea to accelerate funnel, that's really how projects progress through the various stages. Your portfolio is then eventually the sort of the consolidation, the sum up of that. And in that portfolio, as we argued also in this webinar, you really need to make sure that they are progressing. So I think that's one key element in portfolio management, that you're making the stage gate decisions, as Matthijs also explained, and that sometimes projects are stopped and that you are looking whether, it's all still manageable. So I think, to sum up, we've, I think, hopefully given you some insights on how to assess each of the stages for individual projects. And on top of that, look at your overall portfolio and see how that is balanced, whether it's supporting your strategy, and so on.
Yeah.
I made also the questions available in the download right now.
Okay. You found them again, Rob. Yeah, exactly. We had a bit of a technical glitch somewhere in the middle. Apologies for that. One last point, I think, is on the next webinar. It's also the 17th of March.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Let's keep it simple.
Let's keep it simple. You can register for that one already. And I think, considering the time, I suggest we just wrap it up for here.
Yeah, maybe just a few words of what you can expect in that one. It's about that we talk about growth boards, governance, roles and responsibilities, right? So those are it's a bit more the how-to within your organization.
Exactly. Yeah. And I hope you enjoyed it. Again, normally we would like to take a bit more questions. We did in between. We actually look forward to meeting you again in our next webinar. And we hope you enjoyed this one.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.